I want you to do me a favor right now. Just take a quick glance down at your wrist, or maybe, pull your phone out of your pocket and open up that health app.
Oh, yeah, everybody's doing it.
Right. And ask yourself, are you chasing the magical 10,000 steps today? Because, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's like the absolute gold standard of daily fitness.
Oh, right.
It's the number that dictates those weird evening walks around the living room, just pacing back and forth before bed to get those last few hundred.
Just serving the meter.
Exactly. And it's the metric that sparks these intense interoffice rivalries.
Yeah, it really has become this this foundational pillar of modern health consciousness. Like, you hit 10,000 and you feel incredibly accomplished.
You feel great.
But if you hit, say, 4,000, you feel this lingering sense of guilt. The divide is entirely binary in our minds.
It really is. It feels like this unassailable law of nature, like gravity or, I don't know, the speed of light. But we wanted to know, where did that exact perfectly round number actually come from?
Right, like why not 9,000 or 11,200?
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we've pulled a ton of sources. We're talking historical records, global cell phone data, a massive meta-analysis from The Lancet, and even a Reddit debate.
A really revealing Reddit debate, actually.
Yeah, we're going to unpack all of it. Our mission today is to uncover the surprising origins of the 10,000-step rule, examine what the hard science actually says about mortality and walking, and try to figure out the most efficient way for you to stay healthy without constantly obsessing over this arbitrary 5-digit number.
I love that. And, to understand why your watch vibrates at that specific number, we actually have to go back in time quite a bit.
Okay, how far back are we talking?
Well, step counting is not some modern invention born out of Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah.
We tend to think of it as tied to smartwatches and microchips, but the desire to quantify our movement goes back centuries. The earliest records actually point to Leonardo da Vinci.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Da Vinci? That is wild to think about. I'm just picturing someone walking around Renaissance Italy with, like, a wooden gearbox tied to their leg.
You're not far off. Da Vinci is credited with inventing the first mechanical step counter. It wasn't measuring health, though. It was basically a method of estimating distance.
Oh, sure. That makes sense.
Yeah, so it was worn at the waist, and it had this long lever arm that was literally tied to the user's thigh. So every time the thigh moved back and forth while walking, it rotated these gears, which then counted the steps.
Wow. Okay, so fast forward a few centuries, and Thomas Jefferson was apparently doing the exact same thing, but, with a bit more of an analytical approach.
Of course he was.
Right. He commissioned a pedometer from a high-end watchmaker in Paris, and it was designed to fit in a vest pocket. It had this string passing through a hole in the pocket that you'd tie to a strap just below your knee.
That is amazing.
So every step pulled the lever. It was basically an 18th century steampunk fitness tracker.
I love that visual. And he used it to meticulously measure the distance to various Paris landmarks.
Yep. He calculated that an English mile took him exactly 2,066.5 steps in normal weather. But here is where his analytical mind really shines. He noted that a brisk winter walk reduced that same mile to just 1,735 steps.
Oh, wow. So he was actively tracking changes in his own stride length based on pace and the temperature outside.
Exactly. So, okay, the underlying technology of tracking human footsteps is incredibly old.
Yeah.
But the 10,000 number, that definitely wasn't Thomas Jefferson trying to close his rings.
No, definitely not. To find the birth of that specific goal, we actually have to jump over to Japan in the 1960s.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So leading up to the 1964 Tokyo Olympics, there was this massive surge of interest in national fitness across Japan. And there's this academic named Dr. Yoshiro Haton from Kyushu University.
Okay.
And he was getting increasingly worried about rising obesity rates, which basically coincided with the introduction of Western diets to the Japanese population.
Right, the post-war dietary shift.
Exactly. So his team determined that the average Japanese person at that time walked somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 steps a day.
And he reasoned that if he could just convince people to bump that baseline up to 10,000 steps a day, it would burn an extra 300 to 400 kilocalories daily, right?
That was the theory, yeah. And over the course of a year, he figured that deficit could amount to about 20 kilograms of weight loss.
The math made sense on paper. I mean, it was a very clean, easy to understand equation for public health.
Yeah.
But I kind of have to push back on the legacy of this because, sure, Dr. Hatano did the math, but this 10,000 step goal wasn't born from some rigorous, peer-reviewed mortality study that tracked human lifespans for decades.
Oh, not at all.
It feels more like the 1960s equivalent of a viral TikTok challenge.
That's actually a great way to put it.
Right, because shortly after the Tokyo Olympics, this Japanese company called Yamasa essentially took this academic theory and packaged it into a brilliant marketing stroke. They launched a pedometer called the Menpokai.
And the translation of that is just, it's too perfect.
It really is. If you translate Manpokai from Japanese, man means 10,000, po means step, and kai means measure.
So it literally translates to 10,000 steps meter.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's walk 10,000 steps a day became this incredibly kitschy slogan because people just gravitate toward nice round numbers.
They do.
It's memorable. It gives you a clear target to aim for.
But the irony is just staggering. The metric that controls our modern health anxiety, the number that dictates millions of people's daily routines around the globe today, is essentially a 1960s marketing slogan designed to sell a specific plastic gadget in Japan.
It really is wild when you frame it like that. And it forces us to reconsider our entire baseline. I mean, if the 10,000 step goal was engineered for a 1960s Japanese population, how does our modern world actually stack up against it?
Especially considering how much things have changed.
Right. Our built environments, our urban planning, our daily routines, they've all changed drastically over the last 60 years.
Well, let's look at the reality check because we have the numbers. There was a massive study tracking smartphone pedometer data from over 717,000 people across 111 countries.
That's a huge sample size.
It is. It gives us a real-time global census of human movement. And the inequality in physical activity is just massive.
Yeah. So looking at the data, at the top of the list, places like Hong Kong average about 6,880 steps a day per person.
Which is pretty high for a global average.
It is, and that is largely due to dense urban environments and, robust public transit where walking is just a daily necessity. But even then, they still fall well short of the 10,000 mark.
Right.
And then you have the U.S. averaging 4,774 steps, which is heavily influenced by our car-centric suburban sprawl. And trailing further behind is Indonesia at an average of 3,513 steps a day.
And it's not just geography that creates this divide, it's what we do for a living.
Oh, absolutely.
There is this research project out of Australia tracking different occupations, and it paints a pretty brutal picture of modern life. They put pedometers on people in various jobs.
And the disparity is crazy.
Yeah. Waiters clock an exhausting 22,778 steps a day. Nurses are hitting around 16,390 steps.
I mean, those individuals are essentially doing the physical equivalent of a half marathon every single shift.
It's unbelievable. But contrast that with desk jobs. Office workers log a mere 7,570 steps. Call center associates are way down at 6,618.
Yeah, that's a massive drop-off.
Think about what this means for you listening to this. If you are a sedentary office worker averaging maybe 5,000 or 6,000 steps a day, hitting that 10,000 step goal requires you to practically double your daily movement.
It's a huge ask.
It is. It's a massive behavioral shift. A 30-minute brisk walk generally adds about 3,000 to 4,000 steps, depending on your stride. So a sedentary person has to deliberately carve out almost an hour of dedicated walking every single day just to hit this marketing number.
And this brings us to the core issue of human psychology and adherence. If you constantly try to double your output and miss, you experience goal fatigue.
You just give up.
Exactly. If 10,000 is an arbitrary number and striving for it makes people quit entirely, we have to look at what the biological truth actually is. What does the hard science actually say about extending your lifespan?
Well, we have two major studies that break this wide open. Let's start with the mortality data from a Harvard Medical School study.
Okay, yeah, this is a fascinating one.
So they looked at older women with an average age of 72 to see if more steps were strictly associated with a reduced risk of death. And to set the baseline, the sedentary women in the study averaged about 2,700 steps a day, which is pretty close to that lower-end average we mentioned earlier.
Right, but when those women increased their steps to just 4,400 a day, they saw a massive 41% reduction in mortality compared to the sedentary group.
A 41% drop, just for adding roughly 1,700 steps a day.
It's incredible.
I mean, that is maybe a 15 or 20-minute walk around the block.
Yeah, and the mechanism behind this early drop is deeply physiological. Like when a highly sedentary person starts walking even a little bit, it immediately changes their vascular health.
Okay, how so?
Well, walking creates shear stress along the inner lining of your blood vessels, which is called the endothelium. And that stress triggers the body to release nitric oxide.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so that nitric oxide dilates the blood vessels, it lowers blood pressure, and it actually improves the way your muscles absorb glucose. You're basically fleshing out the pipes and waking up your metabolic system.
But the kicker from the Harvard study is that this benefit doesn't just, climb into infinity. The mortality benefits continued to improve as the steps went up, but they leveled off completely at 7,500 steps per day.
Completely flatlined.
Yeah, after 7,500, taking more steps did not offer any additional reduction in mortality for this group.
And that makes sense biologically. Because once your blood vessels have adapted to that daily nitric oxide release and your insulin sensitivity is improved, taking an extra 3,000 steps doesn't magically make the vessels infinitely more flexible.
Right.
The physiological adaptation has already occurred.
So for older women, the finish line isn't 10,000, it's 7,500. Everything after that is just extra credit for calorie burning or mental health, but it's not strictly keeping you alive any longer.
Exactly.
But you might be thinking, well, that's just older women. What about everyone else?
Right, and that's where the most comprehensive piece of evidence we have comes in. It's this massive meta-analysis published in the Lancet Public Health.
Oh, the study is huge.
It really is. It looked at 15 international cohorts, encompassing over 47,000 adults of varying ages, and tracked them over a median of 7 years.
Okay, so a massive data pool.
Huge. And they broke the 47,000 participants down into quartiles based on their daily step counts.
Got it.
The bottom quartile, so the least active group, averaged about 3,553 steps a day. The second quartile averaged 5,801 steps.
And the researchers noted that moving from that bottom group to the second group resulted in a hazard ratio of 0.60.
Which is a huge deal.
Wait, okay, hazard ratio of 0.60. So in plain English, does that mean your risk of dying during that 7-year period drops by 40% just by moving out of the bottom group and walking an extra 2,000 steps a day?
That is precisely what it means.
Wow.
The most dramatic life-saving benefits come from the initial transition out of complete sedentarism. The curve is steepest at the very beginning.
So the first few steps matter the most.
Absolutely. Moving from 3,000 to 5,000 steps does far more for your cellular health, your heart function, and your metabolic regulation than moving from, say, 8,000 to 10,000 steps does.
So we're seeing the exact same pattern as the Harvard study. The biggest gains come from just getting off the couch and doing a moderate amount of walking. You don't have to become a marathon runner to save your life.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Lancet analysis also found that the mortality benefits eventually plateau, just like the Harvard one. But where that happens depends on your age.
Right. For adults 60 and older, the mortality benefits max out between 6,000 and 8,000 steps a day. For adults under 60, it levels off between 8,000 and 10,000 steps.
Okay, so the 10,000 step rule isn't completely fabricated for younger adults. It sits right at the upper edge of where the benefits max out.
Sure.
But treating it as the absolute minimum daily requirement for health is a total myth. I like to think of this using an analogy of charging a smartphone.
Okay, let's hear it.
So when your phone is at 10% battery and you plug it in and get it to 50%, you feel this massive sense of relief and utility.
Oh, yeah. Panic over.
Right. Getting from 10% to 50% changes everything. You can actually use the device. But agonizing over keeping your phone at exactly 100% all day long, taking it off the charger and putting it back on every 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's just exhausting.
It's just unnecessary stress. The phone works perfectly fine at 80%.
That perfectly captures the biological plateau. Every single step counts, especially those first few thousand. But agonizing over the 5-digit gold standard is just wasted energy.
So if the science says 10,000 steps isn't the ultimate finish line, why are our devices still yelling at us when we miss it?
Well, it turns out tech companies are actually starting to quietly pivot away from this flat metric.
Really?
Yeah. There is a fascinating debate that popped up on a Reddit thread on the Apple Watch forum that perfectly illustrates this shift in health tech philosophy.
Oh, I loved this part of the research. So a user posted that they had just switched from a Fitbit to an Apple Watch and were just highly frustrated.
Right, they were missing their fireworks.
Yes. They couldn't find their daily 10,000 step digital fireworks display. They wanted that specific dopamine hit of hitting the big round number.
And the responses in the thread were incredibly revealing. Users jumped in to explain that the two companies were operating on entirely different philosophies.
Oh, so?
Well, Apple's system doesn't prioritize raw step counts on the main display. They prioritize 3 rings.
Ah, right, the rings.
Yeah, you have Move, which is active calories burned, exercise, which is minutes of brisk activity, and stand, which tracks how often you get up.
And one user broke down the science behind this shift perfectly. They pointed out that research indicates walking slowly by itself doesn't dramatically improve cardiovascular fitness. The key is an elevated heart rate.
Exactly. Raw steps are a measure of volume, but the rings are a measure of intensity.
And this brings us right back to the flaw in the 1960s marketing campaign. Not all steps are created equal.
No, they're really not.
A slow 2-hour shuffle around the grocery store while leaning on a cart might get you 5,000 steps. But it isn't challenging your heart in the same way a brisk 15-minute walk up a hill will.
Right. And to test this quantity versus quality debate, the BBC conducted this great experiment with Dr. Michael Mosley.
Oh yeah, tell us about that one.
So they took two groups of people. Group A was assigned the classic 10,000 steps a day challenge.
Classic.
Group B was asked to do something called the active 10 approach. Instead of counting total steps, Group B was simply asked to do 3 10-minute blocks of brisk walking throughout the day.
And the benchmark for a brisk pace was that they should be able to, quote, talk but not sing.
Yeah, which is a great rule of thumb.
I was reading the methodology of that study, and the active 10 approach really surprised me because they basically told people to ignore their pedometers entirely. They just wanted them breathing hard enough that belting out a pop song was off the table, but they could still hold a conversation.
And the results were super interesting. The total number of steps Group B took during those 3 10-minute walks only amounted to about 3,000 steps a day.
So way less volume.
Way less, but the psychological adherence was night and day. 2 out of 3 people in the 10,000-step group struggled to finish the challenge, finding it exhausting to fit an hour of walking into their day.
Which goes back to that roll fatigue we talked about.
Exactly. But the Active 10 group found the 10-minute chunks incredibly easy to maintain.
That completely solves the failure psychology. Knocking out a 10-minute walk after breakfast, one after lunch, and one after dinner is barely an inconvenience.
Yeah, it's totally manageable. But the real magic is in what it did to their bodies. Even though the Active 10 group walked significantly fewer steps overall, they achieved 30% more moderate to vigorous physical activity than the 10,000-step group.
30% more. By walking less, but walking harder.
Yeah, because when you walk at a brisk pace, you are forcing the heart muscle to pump harder and faster. That moderate to vigorous intensity strengthens the myocardium, the heart muscle itself, much more effectively than a slow stroll.
Makes sense.
It also ramps up the clearing of lipids and sugars from your bloodstream. The intensity is the actual trigger for the most significant cardiovascular benefits.
So it's not just the steps, it's what the steps are doing to your heart rate.
Right, and researchers from McGill University offer this brilliant synthesis that just kind of brings all of this together perfectly.
I loved this part.
Yeah, they laid out the math of modern living. So a normal sedentary person gets about 6,000 steps just existing, right? Walking to the car, moving around the office, doing chores.
Just baseline life stuff.
Right. Now, if you add a 30-minute brisk walk to that baseline of 6,000, you add about 3,000 to 4,000 steps.
Which magically lands you right at 10,000 steps.
Exactly.
It's all connected. The 10,000 step goal is basically a Trojan horse. It is a mathematically sneaky way to trick a sedentary person into doing 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous cardio.
That's exactly what it is. The steps themselves aren't the magic potion. The 30 minutes of elevated heart rate hidden inside those steps is what actually keeps you alive.
So the pedometer was just a convenient 1960s tool to measure that effort before we had smartwatches that could track our actual pulse and heart rate variability.
Yeah, exactly. Now that we have the technology to track intensity, clinging to the flat volume metric of 10,000 steps is really just outdated.
Well, we have covered a massive amount of ground today on this deep dive. Let's summarize the ultimate takeaways for you, the listener. First and foremost, do not be paralyzed by the number 10,000.
Please don't.
If you are stuck in an office and only hitting 3,000 steps a day, simply adding 2,000 steps to your baseline is a massive life-extending victory.
Yeah.
As we saw, the sharpest drop in mortality happens in those early increases.
And second, focus on intensity, not just volume. Quality over quantity. Those brisk 10-minute bursts of walking, the active 10 approach, they're not only more sustainable for a busy schedule, but they are highly effective at giving you the moderate to vigorous activity your heart actually needs.
So stop worrying about the fireworks on your wrist and just focus on breathing a little heavier for a few minutes a day.
Yeah, just get the heart rate up.
Now, there's one final lingering detail from the census data that I think we really need to chew on before we go.
Yeah, this part really stuck with me.
We spent all this time talking about how adults struggle to hit these numbers, how we have to map out 10-minute intervals just to trick ourselves into moving. But the data shows that from childhood through adolescence, humans naturally take between 10,000 and 16,000 steps a day.
It requires no effort for them. It is simply how children move through the world. They play, they run, they just exist in motion.
But the data notes this stark physiological cliff. Right as teenagers approach age 18, that daily step count plummets.
They enter adulthood, and the movement just stops.
It stops.
So I want to pose a question for you to ponder on your next walk.
Yeah.
What is it about our transition into adulthood? The way we've structured our desk jobs, our long car commutes, our adult responsibilities, our entire modern society that so fundamentally unteaches us how to move.
We literally sit kids down at desks for 8 hours a day and tell them to stop moving, and then 20 years later, we sell them a plastic device to wear on their wrists to remind them to do what they used to do naturally.
It's kind of tragic.
It is. So tonight, when you find yourself pacing the living room at 11 p.m., staring at that glowing screen and waiting for it to vibrate, ask yourself, are you moving because you want to feel alive, or are you just serving the meter?